So this sermon will be in three parts: present, past, and future. So just a few weeks ago, I was at the immigration courthouse, which, as many of you know, there have been a bunch of us from this congregation who have been trying to be there as witnesses for what's been happening with ICE agents who are picking people up. And at this point, I had seen a lot of things. I had seen children, small children, taken away from families. I'd seen elderly couples separated. I had seen more than I ever wanted to see. So I was there that morning, and it was only maybe 2 days after it had been announced that ICE had received that funding from that bill that would allow them to add so many more people to their ranks. And so I was there in the courthouse, and I see a family. I see 3 small children, and I see what looked like maybe a mom and the dad and the aunt, sister. Everybody looked like family. I wasn't sure who was who, but when we see children like that there in the courthouse, it's scary because we know what can happen. So I was there and I was observing them, and I was thinking, should I go over and introduce myself? But I was trying to hang back. They seemed deep in conversation. They were kind of huddled around, and they were looking at some papers. And I thought, oh, well, maybe one of these adults is actually the attorney for this family. I wasn't quite sure what the relationship was. And then I saw that one of the women began to pass the papers around to the other 2 adults, and she was having them sign them. So as they signed those papers, a white man who I knew to be an agent came up and sat down next to them. And then he and the woman who had distributed the papers, the woman who looked like a member of this family, got up and walked away. And I realized that she was an ICE agent. Now, what they were trying to do at that point was something that was kinder and gentler, perhaps, of not separating families right there in the courthouse. They were having people sign papers saying they would show up at a later date and turn themselves in. But it really wasn't a kinder and gentler process. It was simply that there was more funding to hire more people, and they were hiring people now who looked like the people who are being targeted in the courthouse. Suddenly, there were more black and brown ICE agents than I had ever seen before. And I was left that day with the question of why had this woman, this Latina, taken this job that was about tearing families apart, that was about targeting and oppressing people who looked like they could be in her family. And of course, it didn't take me very long to think of what the answers might be. In our current job market, the answer might be benefits. It might be a hefty sign-on bonus. It might be regular wages. It could be any of those things to answer the question of why she would choose to do that kind of work. And so, as I said, this is about the present. We're starting in the present, and we're talking about the state of work today. And I think so much of what we're seeing is that it's about survival for people, not about finding meaning. It's about figuring out how to put a roof over your head in a housing market that is increasingly more difficult for people to be able to afford. It's about people working multiple jobs and still not feeling like they're able to put the food on the table that they want to be able to put on the table. They're not able to move out on their own and support themselves. And then on top of that, we have labor that is so important, so fundamental to our beings, as eating and all of the different things that that come down the pipeline from people who work in our farms, from people who build things. These are the folks who are being targeted right now. Wasn't it just a few years ago we were calling these folks essential workers? And now we have vans showing up at Home Depot and other locations at farms and grabbing people there. So you have the kind of labor that we are considering disposable, along with the people that we are considering disposable too. What I've noticed is that the youngest generation, and some of you are in the room, Gen Z says, we don't see the benefit of just working without really getting ahead. What we want is a work-life balance, and we're going to do what we can to get that. All of this, I think, plays into this narrative that we hear sometimes. And anybody heard the nobody wants to work narrative? Nobody wants to work, people will say. And then you say, well, what are you offering? Well, we're offering 6 hours, no benefits, low pay. Well, gee, I wonder why they're not beating down the door to come work for you. Nobody wants to work. No, people want to do something that is meaningful, something where they're paid fairly, something where they can make ends meet and have a place in our world that has dignity. People want to work. And then we have people who are out there working, doing jobs that a lot of other people don't want to do, and we're snatching them up right now. People don't want to be exploited. They want to live with dignity and safe working conditions and the possibility of a life outside labor. So let's go into the past. And since Irene picked our quasi-Unitarian Emily Dickinson for that piece this morning, I thought, let's go back to that time period with Louisa May Alcott. She is one of our Unitarian patron saints. Her father, Bronson Alcott, was a Unitarian minister, and Louisa's novels are infused with Unitarian philosophy. Of course, we all know Little Women, which is a feminist classic and filled with those UU values. But the book I want to talk to you about today is a book that she wrote called Work, A Story of Experience. Has anybody read Work, A Story of... Oh, we've got a couple people in the room. So this is one of those great, there we go, great unsung classics, I think, and maybe her best work outside of Little Women. And Work is the story of a woman named Christy Devon. And right on the first page of this book, she's kneading bread dough, and she says, she's an orphan, she's living with her aunt and uncle, and she says to her aunt, she says, I am going to make my way in the world in such a way that I will be dependent on no one, and I will find what it is that I am meant to do. It's like she's kneading this bread, she's kneading a life for herself. She's determined, out of the very clay of life, that she is going to create a working life that is meaningful for her. And guess what? She does just about everything open to a woman at that time. She becomes a companion, paid companion. She becomes a housekeeper. She becomes a seamstress. She becomes an actress. She does everything that's open to her. And she finds, in some of those jobs, she finds dignity, and in some of them she finds things that are soul-crushing. Along the way, she meets a woman, a formerly enslaved woman, who is now working alongside her when she's a housekeeper. And this woman tells her and teaches her that as she moves through the working world, she's not always going to be in conditions where she's treated with dignity and respect. In fact, there may be conditions that are working to deplete her very soul. And this formerly enslaved woman says, look, essentially, you need to know who you are, because that's the only thing that you'll be able to count on going forward. And she has moments that are incredibly challenging. When she's working as a seamstress, the conditions are so difficult that she finds herself worn down in body and spirit. She even is suicidal at that point. But ultimately, she prevails because she has that sense of who she is, even as the conditions change. And she works as a nurse and gets some satisfaction in that. But the conclusion she reaches by the end of the book is a little different than the one she had at the beginning. Because where she finds the real work that she's meant to do in the world is in community work, is in social reform. You know, those really high-paying jobs, right? We're talking about no pay or low pay. But that's where meaning comes from. The meaning that we find in life is not necessarily aligned with the paid work. That is the story written all those years ago of America, and it's still the story. So let me tell you a story. You want to hear an embarrassing story about me? Right? Why not, right? A story of privilege. So after my freshman year at USC, I flew back home to Colorado, where my family was living at the time. And my father was president of a company, and he had set it up so that I got an internship to work that summer. And I had jobs in high school that I had went out and got on my own, and so I knew what it meant to be a working person. And so I showed up, first day at this job, president's son, and I'm taken to this rather gloomy file room. And that's fine, you know, I'm an intern, I expect that. And taken to this gloomy file room, and the lovely woman who was to be my supervisor had wheeled in this cart that was full of files, and she told me, she said, you know, these files need to be filed here on the shelves. The problem with a lot of them is that they're not marked correctly. What's inside shouldn't be what's inside. What's outside shouldn't be right, you know, all this. So I say, okay, you know, I'll figure out a system and work on this. So I did. So she told me, you know, go to lunch when you need to and take breaks and so on. But I saw this cart and I thought, this is going to be a serious job, right? This is a lot of files to get through. So I really just put my head down and I got through these files. I figured out a system, you know, what went where, and I put some different labels on some of them and got them. I even found some issues, you know, in what had already been filed and corrected those. And by 4:45, I only had about 10 of these files left. So, you know, I'm like, okay, I'm going to be able to make it through. It's like Lucy and Ethel at the candy factory, you know, where the chocolate's going by. I'm like, okay, this is going to be a lot, but I'll get even faster as the summer goes on. So my supervisor comes back around 4:45, and she looks and she says, oh, there's like 5 or 10 files left here. And I said, yeah. I said, you know, I'll get to those tomorrow morning. I don't think I'm going to be able to finish all of these today, but you know, I'll get faster over time. And she looks at me and she says, those files were supposed to last you all summer. So let's see. I was the president's son, and this was an internship. It wasn't a real job, was it? That tells you something about privilege. Tells you something about what jobs are available to some people and what the expectations are in those positions. It tells you about what might be open for some folks and not open for other folks. It's a learning experience for me. I've never forgotten that. That's the same thing that Louisa May Alcott's heroine learned. She learned that class, gender, and money shape how we are connected to the working community. Well, the question then becomes, what is the future of work? Well, let's talk about something that I never dreamed I'd be talking about years ago when I went to seminary, not that long ago, but AI, artificial intelligence, right? I've had to preach on this more than once. AI is here, and AI will be continuing to shape and change the way that jobs appear and are enacted in our job market. We don't know exactly what that looks like. We don't know exactly what the timeline will be on that, but we know that it's changing the landscape of work in ways that are really difficult for us to imagine. Certainly as more and more things become automated. I was just watching a scene from a movie that had been generated by AI, and I couldn't tell that they weren't real people. I mean, the acting was, Lifetime movie quality, but still, they're getting to Academy Award winning quality pretty soon. A lot of the things that we think are irreplaceable are perhaps not irreplaceable in the advancement of these kinds of technological things that are happening right now. We're going to have to be talking about things like universal basic income, which means maybe people won't be able to support themselves because there won't be enough of the kind of traditional jobs that were available for them to do so. Again, we don't know what's coming, but we do know it's changing, and it will continue to change. So what I wondered when I was thinking about all of that is, with all of this change, what is constant? And I have something that I want to read to you. It's from Sunil Panchal, and he's an MD who also philosophizes a bit, but I thought this was really lovely. He wrote, "If AI can write code, design logos, answer emails, diagnose illness, compose music, what, if anything, remains? Not just practically, but existentially." Now, at first, this feels like a threat, but maybe we've been looking in the wrong place all along, not into what we can do, but who we are. Because we are not machines. We are consciousness, alive, aware, creative, not simply cogs in a system, but dreamers of the system itself, the edge of the universe becoming aware of itself. That's what it means to be human. What AI can't replace is this: the joy of imagining what has never been, the capacity to deeply feel the interconnection of all things, the act of presencing and creation, of being a bridge between the visible and the invisible, bringing meaning into form. AI may be able to remix what already exists, but we are the ones who dream with originality that which doesn't exist yet. This is what remains. This is what always was. And maybe in externalizing so much, we're being invited to remember what's truly ours, not just what we do, but who we are. We are the universe, dreaming itself into form. Isn't that lovely? So, the question becomes, what is work? What will it mean? How do we find meaning? I was thinking about some of the places I found the most meaningful work in my life, and one of those places was when, Lawrence, I should have given you a trigger warning on this, I'm so sorry. When I was helping to care for my mother-in-law when she was in hospice. And it was very difficult work. For those of you who have been a caregiver at any point, you know the challenges that come with it, both the emotional and the spiritual challenges, and the physical challenges, the logistical challenges. And it was hard. And there were days when she was coherent and days when she wasn't. But in that time, I began to find a lot of meaning in that work, that unpaid work, that work that nobody outside our little circle really knew was happening. But it was helping me to discover things about myself. And one morning after she'd had breakfast, she was pretty aware, and she asked me what was happening. out in the world. And so I was trying to think of things to tell her. And so I told her at this time, I said the minister at our congregation that we were attending was stepping away. And so a new minister would need to be found. Now, I was just a layperson at that congregation. My mother-in-law looked at me and she said, "And you're taking over." And I said, no, I'm not a minister. But something in her saying that touched something in me, and I realized that what we had been sharing together had revealed something about what gave meaning to my life and what kind of work would look meaningful to me. And fortunately, there was a profession, a vocation that I could move into that's a paid vocation, so I'm grateful for that. That allowed me to channel that sense of purpose and meaning into. But I think for all of us, the challenge in life is finding that thing which is truly meaningful for us and figuring out whether that is going to be something that we are paid for or something that is something else that we do that really gives our life purpose. And I think a lot of that 90s Oprah stuff was wrong about follow your passion and it will pay and so on. That's just not true in our world today, unfortunately. Sometimes they're separate tracks. And the good news for this is for all of you who are retired, who are thinking that your working life is done, I'm telling you that it may just be beginning. Because your work continues in life. Your work in contributing through the meaning and purpose that you find to building a world that is more compassionate, more just, that is work that maybe retired people have more time to do than anybody else. So you are being called into the workforce, into this wonderful unpaid workforce that I am Pied Pipering us all into, in the recognition that labor and work is really a labor of love. The labor that we do in our lives that is most meaningful is when we are finding our sense of purpose and following it through and becoming the most compassionate people that we can, in finding the position in life where we are able to do the most good, to make the most change. And goodness knows we need it now in our world. We need to be caring for family. We need to be volunteering. We need to be creating art. We need to be organizing for justice. We need to be mentoring. We need to be simply showing up for one another as we're doing this morning. Our UU faith calls us to honor all forms of labor, to appreciate those who are often unappreciated in what they do, and to recognize that our work as human beings is never truly done. And this, folks, is my Labor Day message to you, that we imagine work not as something that is simply focused on profit, but as that shared labor of compassion, that shared labor of love.